G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and I want to do another episode on the Rings of Power because, well, I'm actually enjoying the venting, the feel of talking about them, getting it off my mind. And today I want to talk about film adaptation. So, a film adaptation is the transfer of a work or story, in part or in whole, to a feature film from another form of media. In particular, book to movie. Well, the most common form of film adaptation is the use of a novel as a basis. There are other things that can be done, including, non-fiction, journalism, autobiographical works, comic books, scriptures, plays, historical sources, or even other films. Adaptation from such diverse resources has been ubiquitous part of the practice of filmmaking since the earliest days of cinema in the 19th century of Europe. In contrast to when people were making a remake, movie directors usually take more creative liberties when creating a film adaptation historically. So why would someone adapt a story in the first place for the screen? Well, taking a story from one medium and recreating it for another gives you access to a ready-made fan base, and it allows you to more accurately predict your financial success or failure based on such a thing. The lesser thing is, in general, the desire to create the adaptation as a passionate art form. This is a secondary consideration because all of these adaptations are done for financial gain. With that in mind, The Rings of Power is a woeful adaptation in my mind. I spoke in an earlier episode about how there are certain sacrifices made in adapting stories to the big screen. Let's take a look at the original Lord of the Rings for an example of a lost story, and in this case, we'll use the Scouring of the Shire. So in the novels, the hobbits return home only to find that the Shire itself has been corrupted by evil men, and the people, the hobbits, have been enslaved, the land ravaged, trees chopped down, and, it's horrible. This is hinted at in the film with the vision in Galadriel's mirror, but is ultimately left out of the story. In the novels, the four hobbits rally the defenders of the Shire, and with their newfound courage and all the wisdom learned in their travels, they ultimately strike down the evil men and find out that a wretched Saruman was actually behind the whole situation, and he himself is actually let go by an empathetic Frodo, who understands the value of life. He has grown greatly in wisdom. Frodo wishes no harm to come to Saruman, who has lost what once made him great, yet he's still a being of ancient and noble power. Saruman tries and fails to receive death at the hands of the hobbits by acting aggressively, but after one abuse too many, he turns Wormtongue against him, and Wormtongue stabs Saruman in the back, himself being shot by hobbit archers, and the wizard decays to a husk before their very eyes, with the spirit departing the corpse and heading into the west. In the films, we see Wormtongue betray Saruman at Orthanc in Return of the King Extended Edition, but the story for them ends there. The story wasn't adapted in the film, because it ruins the tone and pacing of the film. The writing team speaks out about it in the commentary track, and I tend to agree with them. By this point in the story, Sam has heroically saved Frodo, the ring is destroyed, the world has been saved, Barad-dûr toppled, Aragorn and Arwen have wed, the hobbits are acknowledged for their part in all of this, and all that's left is for them to return home and settle into a quiet life, and for Frodo and Bilbo to retire to the west. Interrupting the flow of the story to all of a sudden add an entirely new thread, a new villain, a subplot, all at the 11th hour, undoes a lot of what makes the film ending so special and why we get such a strong emotional reaction. Now, could it work? Sure, you can tell the story, but, well, I don't think there's enough time allotted to such a story, because it would take at least another half an hour, and you don't have the time to allow it to breathe to make it work that far into the film. You're already 3 hours in by this point. So, now that I've said that, let's look at the Rings of Power and their choice to adapt the Second Age and multiple important events that are really separate issues. For a start, something has to be said for adapting material that you do not have access to. This, in my mind, is no excuse for bad storytelling. The people writing the show have chosen this limitation. They have chosen to handicap themselves. And when there is a ready-made universe which they do have access to, for example, they could cover the journeys of Aragorn before Lord of the Rings, his love story with Arwen, the the fall of Gondor and Arnor, the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, as shown or hinted at in the Hobbit films' flashbacks. There's the 3,000-year gap between Isildur cutting the ring from Sauron's hand and the Hobbit that's just oozing with potential exploration. There's the arrival of the Istari, the wizards, 1,000 years before the films. You could have Prince Amroth, the elf character who heads south and founds Dol Amroth before heading into the west. The rise of Mordor, the fall of Minas Ithil. Unfortunately, though, the writers chose to tackle the Second Age, which has amazing storytelling potential, but since they don't have access to that, or they have access to so little of it, they simply made a bad decision here. They could have chosen, say, a strong female warrior Galadriel, which they did in their Adaptation, when instead they could have had Tar Eldarion and Arendis, the Númenórean king who forges an alliance with Gil-galad, and the story of his estranged wife and daughter. The daughter becomes Númenor's first ruling queen. Tar Eldarion himself establishes the first successful Númenórean harbours in Middle-earth. They have taken elements of these stories and bastardised them instead. The writers have also chosen to adapt a span of time as great as that span from the prologue of Lord of the Rings through to the end of Return of the King. But instead of portraying events that happen in this time frame and focusing on the key ones, they've chosen to condense the storyline and the span of time that the corruption occurs over down to a series of simultaneous events, which robs all of the characters of their agency. It also sidetracks us because we're constantly going around with unnecessary characters and events, such as the Harfoots and the Meteor Man. I don't care if he is or isn't a wizard. My problem is that there are too many things happening at the same time, yet the show feels miserably paced, and somehow we don't spend enough time with any of the characters. It plays with my brain. Further to this, and most importantly, is that the strength of the adaptation lies in its source material. Great sources should equal a great adaptation in an ideal world. For me, I know I'll probably only get one chance at a Silmarillion TV show in my lifetime. So why waste that opportunity? Telling me to shut my brain down and to not complain isn't in my nature. For those who are satisfied with the show, I have to ask, if they actually did a better job of adapting it in order to please people like me, well, since you don't care for the background anyway, how could it diminish your experience? Would it not be better if the thing was better overall for everyone? Instead, Amazon has ultimate say in this new and worse continuity, based not on earning such a right on writing their own masterpieces of literature, but down to the fact they paid for it. It's a commodity to them, and that's sad. I'll give an example now of some of the ways the adaptation fails at understanding the world it's in. One thing I noticed, others may have noticed it too, but since I don't really frequent forums and I don't watch that many videos on this sort of topic, I'm just going to assume that I was bothered by it alone. And that is, at the start of the first episode, the elves go to fight Morgoth in Middle-earth. Now, it doesn't matter the particulars of that narration, the things it gets wrong. Those are minor things, but we see a map of Valinor as the elves sail away, followed by their destination, a map of Middle-earth itself. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but only that isn't Middle-earth, because in the First Age, Middle-earth has an entire additional landmass called Beleriand, and that is where all the great events of that age take place. That is the land that is sunk beneath the ocean at the end of the age to cleanse the land of Morgoth's evils. That's a momentous event. It reshapes the world, with Angband, Morgoth's great fortress, being destroyed. The remains of the great elven kingdoms of Doriath and Gondolin are sunk. The bodies of the great dragons and all their kind, minus Scathor or Smaug, are all submerged, such as Ancalagon the Black, a dragon so great that when he fell from the clouds, he shattered the mountains of Thangorodrim beneath him after being slain by Irindil the Mariner with a Silmaril upon his brow. The fact that the people creating and approving the visuals didn't get such a simple thing right as the world the elves moved to, that's important. Small details are important, and attention to detail is a big thing. Peter Jackson's films were all about the small details, and so it's very easy to nitpick Amazon in comparison. I spoke about Númenor and their long, slow corruption, which ultimately accelerates in the end thanks to Sauron, but in this TV series, they're a mere husk. Looking at their great harbour at the end of the Second Age, as the show portrays, it's a city which should look like Babylon or Imperial Rome or ancient Carthage, and instead it has a harbour and is smaller than Lake Town in the Hobbit films. What about Mithril, this suddenly important metal? They need it because they needed the plot to occur, and it's another side plot that has nothing to do with forging the Rings of Power and the rise of Sauron. I get it, Durin's Bane the Balrog is cool, and it's nice to see Khazad-dûm in its prime, but it's some new amazing metal that can somehow stave off evil and brings regrowth to plants? Mithril was used in Bilbo's mail shirt, built for the Elven Prince, or an Elven Prince I should say, in Gondolin back in the First Age. There's the Elendomir, an ancient circlet of the First Age, which was worn by the line of Elros, the first king of Numenor, given to his daughter as a sign of her rank and for her line to carry on. It actually exists all the way into the end of the Third Age. The Ring of Galadriel, Nenya, is made from this same metal, as were the crowns of Numenorean kings, including Elendil and his bodyguards, and that continues right down to the time of Return of the King, with the guards of the Fountain Court also still wearing them. Yet in the TV show, they're just discovering this metal. But they wouldn't have. They discovered it at least 2,500 years earlier. It was a well-known metal used throughout the First Age. So what does this have to do with adaptation? Well, I ask the question, why adapt a work if you intend to change so much about it, especially after we've explicitly seen it portrayed in other media? The show is going out of its way to incorrectly adapt events, and whilst that's tolerable if it results in a better story, who actually thinks that what we're getting is a faithful retelling of the Rings of Power? Nobody could possibly believe that. What we're getting is a fanfic, where Galadriel is a thousands-of-year-old hothead with zero of her original character. The Numenoreans aren't the greatest realm in mortal ardor. Elrond is forging the relationship with the dwarves in place of Celebrimbor. Hobbits who aren't going to appear for 5,000 more years, hanging around with wizards who won't appear for 4,000 more years, and they all coexist in this same time period. And the viewer is just constantly being dragged, kicking and screaming from one event to the other at all stages. If you want to adapt a work to portray it to your ready-made audience who likes the story as it was written, why would you throw that book out of the window in favour of your own demonstrably worse story? And so that's where this video comes from. The Rings of Power doesn't understand how to adapt a book to a film. Anyway, what do you all think? As I say, I'm a tabletop wargaming channel. You know, I look after things like Warhammer and the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. Things like that appeal to me. 3D printing, that also appeals to me. So those are the things I like to talk about a lot. And I don't tend to spend much time talking about media, except maybe in live streams with friends. So for me, this is a bit of a step out of what I ordinarily would do. And I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. There is absolutely no need to like or subscribe or anything like that. We're not a YouTube channel set up for that. This YouTube channel exists just for myself and my co-host to express ourselves. That's it. We don't do it because we want to earn money. We don't need internet clout or anything like that. It's simply because it's one of the only ways to get your voice out there. And I think that's very important. Anyway, that's all from me. Let me know what you think about what I've had to say today in the comments below, and I'll catch you all on the next one.